We're called to be procreators, professional creators, producers. So we have to understand what sex means, what sex represents. It's already widely known that as a species, we know what the act itself is. So do the animals. But two things go into sex that are very important for us to understand if we want to create anything in this life. We have to understand that in order to professionally create, to create with intent, to create with purpose, pleasure and productivity have to go hand in hand. To eliminate either one of these will create a problematic scenario in the things that we're trying to create in this life. If we're only focused on productivity and no pleasure, then we will have a more soulless society. If we focus on just pleasure and no productivity, we're going to have a prodigal and a frivolous and a wasteful society. We need to have the productivity and the pleasure share the same exact sacral energy space. We have to come from that creative center. What is the sacral chakra? A lot of occultists refer to sex as an acronym for sacral energy exchange. That exchange of creativity, that exchange of what is coming from where they say intuition is housed. The intuition, when you go to school, college, if you're not getting a free ride, if you're not on a full scholarship, then you got to pay tuition. So when you have intuition, that means you're already paid up. You start off with a full scholarship in this thing of creation. Just because you exist, you already have a procreational degree. You have a master's, a PhD in procreation, just because you are here. But you need pleasure and productivity, these two things, to share the exact same space. This is what is required to understand sex. The reason for the porn industry is to make a display of sex on the outside. When a person doesn't put pleasure and productivity together, they can be approaching a world like porn with purely pleasure only in their intent. And they're going to find out that there's no end to the porn industry scenarios. There's no end to the XXX, because XXX is really just the number 3, because X is 10 in Roman numerals. And when you're counting numerologically, according to numerology, you're rounding things off to a single digit, and there are no zeros. So you're stuck in 3. You're stuck in Trinity. You're stuck watching a power from the outside, watching a triangle from the outside. You're kind of stuck in a voyeuristic mode. So you can look at the triple X world. It can be a 3 strikes you're out type of thing if you're going into it like in an addictive manner, or if you get caught in the addictive properties of the porn industry. You're going to be caught up in 3. You're going to be caught up in XXX. You're going to be caught up in watching a triangle from the outside. You're going to be caught up in just watching the pleasure of it. Because if you're a viewer, then that doesn't make you a producer, because you're not making any money from watching it. So that's where the idea of sex, even if we looked at it physically, how you can still go awry by messing up the same principles of the 2 P's of pleasure and productivity. Conversely, quiet is kept. A lot of families can come on the scene in big numbers off productivity only, which is what you get in Jacob's story. If you look at the scriptures, had Rachel and Leah beefing, and then their handmaids beefing, all of which Jacob was having children with. But what you saw was the absence of pleasure in the demonstration in these scenarios. All you saw was productivity, no pleasure. That's why all of the women were fighting over him, because there was no pleasure. It was just productivity. He was just having a bunch of kids. He was just laying down with the women. There was no emphasis based on the text on the pleasurable aspect of it. So you had this war over productivity. These women were fighting over Jacob because pleasure and the two P's weren't there. The productivity was, but people weren't pleased ultimately in this scenario. Jacob wasn't pleased. The women weren't pleased. The kids weren't pleased. The kids was trying to bribe their dad to sleep with their particular mom. So there was no pleasure. There was all productivity. And you can have a very rigid and a very stagnated production. You can be stuck in a state of arrested development if you don't have both P's going into the idea of sex, pleasure and productivity. And I'm not saying that you should only be having sex for the purposes of procreation. That's not what I'm saying. But you do need both P's. So when we're talking about sex in the idea of not having children, if just for the act of pleasure, just for the act of physical connection, then that is what you're producing. You're producing the physical connection. You're producing the physical release. You're producing the animus, the connection. You're putting the battery together. You're putting the plug in the outlet. You're cutting the lights on. You and your partner are both arriving at pleasure. You are both serving each other. So you are both being productive. You're producing pleasure for one another. So the two P's are there, whether you're in it to have children or not. So don't be ashamed. Don't feel uncomfortable. Because productivity and pleasure, if they're going hand in hand, then what sex represents has been fulfilled. To spread the idea of this and to go back to that whole mark of the beast thing with the number of men being 666, the reason why it sounds like sex is because 666 is the number of man, as it is said. And so it's pointing to humanity 3 times. Humanity, humanity, humanity. This is what it means to go in beast mode in life. You see how I'm demystifying this, and I'm not causing you to choose one side or the other. I'm just breaking it down in a way that you can apply it to your life. Whenever you want to go professionally create something and you want to be productive and get the pleasure out of what you produce, you got to be thinking man, 666. Sex. Not the physical act of having it, but procreate. It's like a flashing sign, like over here. Man, because you want to uplift humanity. You want to uplift people. You get that? It's like one thing being emphasized over and over. Like it's one thing, it's 3 exclamation marks. It's like a refrain. It's like the hook. If you want the hook to catch, you got to repeat the hook. So to go in beast mode and to understand like just how to be a beast in this life, we don't mean animalistic, not having a conscience, but to be an unstoppable force, like a juggernaut, then you have to master what the 6 implies. Because the beast is here in a very dark way, is all over the landscape. And people are marked by this beast. They're taking the mark of this beast. I'm just here to introduce a whole nother mark. I'm saying that before you can get ready, set, and go, before you got to get on your mark, because this is a human race. You know, we're racing to whatever finish line it is, godhood, whatever you want to call it. But we are in a race, and it's only built on if you can finish. It doesn't matter if you get there first. It just matters if you get there. There's a checkered flag waiting on everybody. All you got to do is cross the finish line. All you got to do is break the tape. All you got to do is break the loop, break the recording pattern, break the tape. All you got to do is go through it. All you got to do is break through it. You know, you can't walk through it. You got to have some momentum. Run through that thing. That's how you're going to break the tape. It's a human race, so you racing as a human. And so to cross that finish line, you got to master that duat. You got to master that duality. You got to understand that in order to finish anything in life, in order to cross a finish line with anything successfully and to be worthy of placement, you got to reconcile that giving and receiving, that masculine and that feminine, that plus and that minus, that above and that below, that within and without. That's why we go over the same material, because it applies to everything. All of these things are sign markers for the same thing. You want to be productive, truly productive, there has to be pleasure involved. You want true pleasure in this life, you got to be productive. You can't have one P without the other, baby. You got to have both of them. You got to have both of them. Because this is sacral. We're talking about creating. Everything produces itself, and everything is pleasurable. The grass looks beautiful green, but it has to produce. It has to grow. The trees look beautiful with the leaves on them and the fruit, but it has to produce. It's pleasing to the eye, but it still has to produce. It has fruit that is pleasing to the taste, but it still has to produce. That pleasure and that production go hand in hand. This extends to all things. Look at, well, not when you consider even the human reproductive organs, you have the organs where they are for a reason. If you're a male and you want to be a professional creator, just like what the male organ does in the physical act of sex, you got to be able to stand erect. Man, you stand erect on your principles, firm on your foundation. Because again, referencing the anatomy of the male, you have two testes. Test these, which is two centers of creation. You got to test both of them, man. You got to test the production that comes out of the positive side of it and the negative side of it. Man, you got to weigh the pros and the cons of a situation as you stand erect, as you stand full, ready to enter your new endeavor. It's going to be dark. See, we're referencing the physical act, but we're talking about just handling yourself in life and society. So that's why we're not being lewd, but we do have to be very, very graphic so you can see how these things link to one another. Productivity and pleasure. You have to, you have to stand firm. Not limp in your principle. Don't be a pushover. You got to stand strong. You have to stand strong. You have to stand erect. That's what all these monuments are about. Don't be worshiping all of this crazy stuff when it comes to all of that. No, every time you see a monument or something like that, just remember to stand firm in what you believe and what you're about. That's what you have. That's all you got to do. You don't have to be attributing it to any kind of deities, because all of that can turn into a whole bunch of balderdash. It can turn into a whole bunch of circular arguments that lead nowhere. Let's go straight to the power of what these things can represent. Let's go straight to the light code of what these things can activate. So these two things are going to be tested. Just like you have males, you have the male scrotum. There's two. It's going to be two tests. Weigh the pros, weigh the cons, and stand firm. Women, you pretty much, you have to open up, I guess. You have to open up, and you have to be more, I guess, less rigid. So for a woman, when she gets an aha moment, it's an opening, and she's not rigid, because a woman has to guard herself. So naturally, she is going to have to be on the defensive, because that's how she was formed. She is the one who has to be protected. So when a woman says she's letting her hair down, and when a woman says she's comfortable enough to open up, that's what that is symbolizing. So for a woman to receive the productivity and the pleasure that she needs in life, is those things she's gonna have to open up to the idea. She can't be stuck in a box, so to speak. She would have to open up, and she would have to be, whatever's in her would have to be like pouring out, such as where the moistening of the female anatomy, the moistening and the opening of the female anatomy is what these things represent. So If a woman feels like life is bland and life is dry, then pleasure and productivity are going to be noticeably absent from her life. But if she's choosing to open up and to outpour, then she's going to find both pleasure and productivity. This is what a woman does when she's actually raising children. The symbology behind it. She's pouring out of herself in terms of love and nurturing and instruction for her children. And she's opening up to her children, to their cries, to their needs, to their wants, to their thoughts, to their movements. She's opening up to these things. So there you have it. We take all of the lewdness and all of the dirtiness and all of the taboo nature out of sex and just look at what it does and add that to the creation of life, because you are a professional creator. You are a professional creator simply because you exist. So with that being said, be sexy. Be sexy. We don't mean that you gotta be extra alluring physically. No. Be about pleasure and productivity to the point where they work seamlessly. To enjoy your working, to enjoy what it is you do, to take pleasure in your labors. It says in Ecclesiastes, this is the gift from God. This is the gift from absolute power. To gain productivity and pleasure, to gain pleasure from productivity, to gain productivity from your deepest sense of pleasure. In a nutshell, you are a professional creator. So go ahead and create, pro. Yellow Planet.